My family chose my younger brother over me for 11 years straight, and I mean that in every way you can imagine. But none of that prepared me for the night my father walked through the front doors of my luxury day spa, demanded a private suite, and slid a contract across the reception desk ordering me to sign over 40% of my business. What he didn't know was that the building he was standing in already had my name on the deed. My name is Sloane, and I am 32 years old. I own Sloane, a high-end medical spa and wellness studio in the River North neighborhood of Chicago. Before I get into what happened that night, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever had a family member come crawling back the moment they realized you'd built something without them, hit subscribe. You're going to want to hear every word of this. It was a Thursday evening in late October and Sloane was running at full capacity. We had a corporate wellness event booked in our private lounge, 2 bridal parties rotating through the treatment rooms, and a wait list of walk-ins that my front desk coordinator had been managing since 4 o'clock. The air smelled like eucalyptus and warm cedar, and the soft instrumental music playing through the overhead speakers created the kind of atmosphere that takes years and an obsessive amount of intention to get exactly right. I was in the back reviewing the next month's vendor invoices when my coordinator, a sharp 26-year-old named Piper, knocked on my office door and told me there was a situation at the front. Piper's voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. I set down my pen, straightened my blazer, and walked out. The moment I rounded the corner into the reception area, I felt every muscle in my body go rigid. Standing at my white marble front desk, helping himself to the complimentary sparkling water we set out for clients, was my father. He was wearing a charcoal blazer and the kind of confident, territorial expression that I had spent the last 11 years trying to forget. Behind him stood my mother, my younger brother Kyle, and his wife Amber. I hadn't spoken to any of them since I was 23 years old. That was the winter I told my father I wouldn't co-sign a personal loan he needed to fund Kyle's 3rd failed business venture. The business before that one had already cost our family close to $40,000, money that had come, as I would later find out, from a savings account my late grandmother had set up in my name for graduate school. I had been working full-time since I was 19, putting myself through an aesthetics program and then an accelerated business certificate, living in a studio apartment with 2 roommates and eating rice and canned soup 4 nights a week. I had never asked my parents for a single dollar. But the moment I said no to my father's demand, he told me I was selfish, that I had always been the difficult one, and that until I was ready to put family first, I wasn't welcome in their home. I thought he meant for a few weeks. It was 11 years. And now here he was, standing in the lobby I had designed tile by tile, telling Piper in his most important-sounding voice that he needed to speak with the manager immediately. I walked up to the desk and kept my voice completely flat. "I'm the manager," I said. "I'm the owner." My father turned slowly, and for 1/2 second something moved across his face that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't guilt. It was closer to recalibration, like he was quickly adjusting his approach. "Sloane," he said, as if we'd seen each other last Sunday. "Good, then we can talk privately." He didn't say hello. He didn't say I look well. He just reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out a folded set of papers. Kyle had hung back near the door. He was wearing a fleece vest and a baseball cap, and he looked like he was trying to blend into the wall. Amber stood beside him in a cream-colored blouse, clutching her purse with both hands and scanning the spa with an appraising look. The kind of look people give a place when they're trying to figure out how much it's worth. My mother moved toward me first. She opened her arms like we were about to embrace at an airport. "Sweetheart," she said softly. I took a quiet step back and looked at my father instead. "What is this?" I asked, nodding toward the papers. He set them on the marble desk with a flat, deliberate sound. "We're here because it's time to make things right," he said. "Kyle and Amber are expecting their first child. He needs stability. This business is doing well, clearly. 40% Sloane. Sloane. You sign this, we're all square, and we move forward as a family." I looked at the contract without touching it. "You want 40% of my spa," I said. "We're not asking for charity," my father said. "We're offering Kyle the chance to come in as a partner. He has operational experience. He can help you scale." You've done well on your own, I'll give you that. But a business like this needs leadership at the executive level, and that's where your brother. I'd like you all to come with me, I said. I didn't wait for a response. I walked to the end of the reception hallway and held open the door to our private consultation suite, a room we used for first-time client assessments. It had 4 upholstered chairs, a low-glass table, and a one-way privacy panel on the exterior window. It was quiet, and it was away from my clients. They filed in. My father sat down first, which told me everything I needed to know about how he thought this conversation was going to go. Kyle dropped into a chair near the far wall. Amber perched on the edge of her seat and looked at her phone once before putting it away. My mother chose the chair closest to mine and folded her hands in her lap. I remained standing. You want to talk about scaling a business, I said, looking at my father. Let's talk. How's the contracting company? He straightened in his seat. Strongest year we've had in a while. Which location? I asked. A small pause. The Naperville office, he said. The Schaumburg location closed? I asked. He looked at me the way people look at someone who's supposed to know less than them but doesn't. We consolidated, he said, strategically. I nodded slowly. Kyle leaned forward from his corner. Look, Sloane, this doesn't have to be complicated. Amber and I just need a foundation, something stable. You've clearly built something real here, and we're not trying to take it from you, we just think. You think I'll hand you 40%, I said, because that's what's always worked before. Kyle closed his mouth. Amber looked down at her lap. My mother reached out and touched my wrist. Sloane, your brother is going to be a father. Don't you want to be part of that? Don't you want to be an aunt? There it was. I had wondered how long it would take. I'd love to be part of it, I said, pulling my hand back gently. I've been available for 11 years. Nobody called. You left, my mother said, her voice catching just slightly. You pulled away from this family. Dad told me I wasn't welcome until I was ready to put family first, I said. I'm curious what changed. My father cut in before my mother could answer. He leaned forward, clasped his hands together, and delivered what I could tell was a prepared speech. Here's the reality, Sloane. You're operating a luxury business in a premium commercial space in River North. You have competitors opening up on every block in this neighborhood. Without strong backing, without a real executive partner, businesses like this plateau and then they collapse. I know people in this city. I know the property management group that runs the building you're in. Alan Rutherford, you know that name? He's the managing director of the firm that owns this entire block. I've done insurance work with his company for years. I can make one phone call and have your lease flagged for review. That's not a threat, Sloane. It's a reality. He sat back. Sign the contract, he said, and none of that is necessary. Piper knocked once on the suite door and leaned in. Chef, sorry, I have the 7 o'clock refresh for the lounge. Thank you, Piper, I said. Please go ahead. And will you let the team know I'll be back on the floor in 20 minutes? She nodded and left. I looked at my family. My father was watching me with that specific patient expression he used when he was certain he had already won. Kyle was picking at the hem of his vest. My mother had produced a tissue from somewhere and was holding it in her fist like a prop. Stay here, I said. I'll be right back. I went to the reception desk, typed in my manager override code, and opened a new client file for the suite. I had Piper bring in a tray, sparkling water, still water, a small plate of the complimentary herbal shortbread we served to new clients. Then I went to my office, opened the bottom drawer of my desk, took out a sealed manila envelope with a blue notarial stamp on the corner, and walked back to the suite. I set the tray on the table in front of them. My father eyed the envelope. Is that your attorney? He asked. No, I said. I stayed standing. My mother accepted a glass of still water and held it without drinking. Amber reached for a shortbread cookie and then put it back. Kyle hadn't moved. I want to ask you something, I said. When Grandma Vera passed, she left a savings account in my name. I was 21. She had been putting money into it since I was 7 years old. It was meant for my education. Did either of you know what happened to that account? My mother set down her water glass. My father looked at a point somewhere past my shoulder. I don't know what you're referring to, he said. $22,000, I said. She deposited $100 every single month for over 18 years. It was in my name. It required a co-signature from a parent to be accessed before I turned 25. The room was very quiet. 3 months after she passed, I continued, the account was liquidated. The funds were used as a down payment on equipment for Kyle's first business, the one that failed inside of 14 months. Kyle's jaw tightened. He looked at the wall. We needed it, my father said finally. His voice had changed. It had lost the smooth authority and become something lower and more defensive. You weren't using it. You weren't even enrolled in school. I was working 60 hours a week saving money to enroll, I said. You knew that. My mother looked at her hands. Sloane, she said softly. We were doing the best we could. Kyle was struggling. You were always so capable. We knew you'd find a way. I let that sentence hang in the air for a moment. I did find a way, I said. And now I'd like to talk about Alan Rutherford. My father refocused. He straightened again, reclaiming some of the authority he dropped when I brought up the inheritance. Alan is a professional contact, he said carefully. Yes, I agreed. He is. He's also a client of mine. His wife has been coming here for facials every 6 weeks for almost 3 years. His daughter had her bridal party here in August. I know Alan Rutherford. A very small shift crossed my father's expression. More than that, I said. I know he sold the property management firm to a private holding group 8 months ago. He is retired. He lives in Scottsdale now and has nothing to do with the management of this building or any other building in River North. My father opened his mouth. I kept going. So when you say you're going to call Alan Rutherford and have my lease flagged, what you actually mean is that you're going to call a retired man in Arizona and ask him to interfere with a building he no longer owns on behalf of a business he's never worked with, to pressure a tenant he has no jurisdiction over. I paused. That's the threat. My father said nothing. Kyle looked at the floor. Who owns the building now? My mother asked, almost to herself. I picked up the manila envelope from the table and unwound the clasp on the back. I pulled out a single sheet of heavy paper, the kind they use for official state filings. I set it on the glass table face up. At the top in clean black type it read, Certificate of Organization, Illinois Limited Liability Company. I turned it so my father could read it clearly. A group called Meridian Property Holdings purchased the entire commercial block 14 months ago, I said. All cash acquisition, closed in 22 days. The sole managing member is listed on line 7. My father leaned forward slowly and read the line. I watched the color change in his face. Meridian Property Holdings, I said quietly. That's mine. I own the building. He sat back in his chair. Not dramatically, the way people fall in movies. He just sat back, like something in him went slack. Kyle made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Amber looked at the document for a long moment and then looked at her husband. My mother pressed the tissue she'd been holding to her lower lip. Let me explain something, because I've heard people ask how a woman who was broke at 23 could own a commercial block in River North at 32. The answer is not glamorous. The answer is that I worked 6 days a week for 4 years in someone else's spa, sleeping on an air mattress in a 1-bedroom apartment I shared with another esthetician, and I put away money with the discipline of someone who knows exactly what it means to have nothing. I got my aesthetics license at 19, my business certificate at 21, and my first small business loan at 24, a $40,000 SBA loan that I repaid 18 months early. At 26, I opened Soleil in a leased space 2 blocks from where we're sitting right now. At 29, I refinanced with a commercial lender and used the equity I'd built in the business to make my first real estate investment, a mixed-use building in Pilsen. That building appreciated. I sold it. I took those proceeds plus 3 years of reinvested spa revenue, and I made an offer on this block the month it came on the market. It was a distressed sale. The previous owners were over-leveraged after a rate adjustment on their development loan, and they needed a buyer who could close quickly without a lengthy institutional approval process. I was that buyer. I did it by not buying things I couldn't afford. I did it by not funding other people's failures. My father recovered before the others did. That was always how he operated. He processed setbacks privately and then immediately tried to reframe. This doesn't change the substance of what we're asking, he said. His voice was controlled but thinner than before. Family is family, Sloane. Whatever happened with the building, that's business. What we're talking about is bringing Kyle in so he has a future for his child. You have more than you need here. More than I need, I repeated. You're a single woman running a spa, he said. You don't have a family of your own to support. Kyle does. That's all we're saying. Something shifted in the room when he said that. Not loudly, but it shifted. Amber looked at Kyle. Kyle looked at the table. The business I filed for bankruptcy, Kyle said, almost under his breath. What? My father said sharply. Chapter 7, Kyle said, not looking up. Filed 3 weeks ago. The food truck company. I didn't tell you yet. My father stared at his son. Amber pressed her hands flat on her knees and stared at nothing. Kyle, my mother said. We've been behind on the mortgage since June, Kyle said. He sounded exhausted. Not dramatic, just genuinely tired. Amber's on maternity leave starting next month. I didn't know what else to do. That's why we're here. And there it was. The quiet part finally spoken out loud. My father turned to look at me and I could see the calculation happening in real time. He was trying to figure out if he could recover the negotiation now that his leverage was gone, and his son had just admitted they were drowning. Sloane, my father said, and his voice had changed again. It was softer now, deliberately softer. I know we haven't handled things perfectly. I know there's a history here that I'm not proud of, but this is a baby. This is your niece or nephew. You have the means to help your brother keep his house. You have the means to give this child a real start. That's all we're asking. I looked at Amber. She was pregnant. She looked tired. She hadn't said a word this entire time, and I had a feeling she hadn't been given much of a choice about being here tonight. Amber, I said. She looked up. Did you know about the contract before tonight? She hesitated. I knew Kyle and your father were going to talk to you. Were you told it was going to be framed as a legal agreement? She didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. I'm sorry you're in this position, I said, and I meant it. My mother had been quiet for a while and now she tried again. She reached toward me across the table. Sweetheart, please. Whatever happened before, whatever we did wrong, I'm asking you to let it go. For the sake of this child. For the sake of all of us. I looked at her hand, resting on the edge of the table between us. I've spent 11 years letting it go, Mom, I said. I let go of the graduation you didn't come to. I let go of the birthday I spent alone in that studio apartment because Dad had decided I wasn't part of the family yet. I let go of finding out about Grandma Veer's account from a forensic accountant I hired when I was 28 because I wanted to understand why I had nothing to start with. I paused. I've been letting it go this whole time. You just weren't there to see it. She withdrew her hand. My father stood up. He wasn't going to cry or collapse, that wasn't who he was, but the authority was entirely gone. You're really going to let your brother lose his house, he said. Over old grudges. I'm not letting anything happen to Kyle, I said. I have no power over the choices he made, and I'm not giving 40% of a business I built from scratch to someone who has filed for bankruptcy 3 times to steady himself for a conversation he should have had with a financial counselor. Kyle flinched. What I will do, I said, is this. I pulled a business card from my blazer pocket and set it on the table. It was for a nonprofit financial counseling organization on the north side, a group I'd personally donated to for the past 2 years. They looked specifically with families facing foreclosure and helped them navigate consolidation, renegotiation, and housing assistance programs. They helped a member of my staff keep her home last year, I said. They're real, they're free, and they're good at what they do. That's the help I can offer. Kyle looked at the card for a long moment. Amber reached over quietly and picked it up. My father looked at it and then looked away. I think this conversation is finished, I said. I walked to the suite door and opened it. Piper will walk you out." My mother stood slowly, gathering her coat and her purse. She paused at the door. "I hope someday you understand," she said quietly, "how much we love you." "I hope someday you understand," I said, "what that word is supposed to mean." She walked out. My father left without speaking again. Tao paused in the doorway and looked back at me, not with anger, but with something more complicated than that. He looked like a man who had run out of road and was only now realizing how long he'd been driving in the wrong direction. "I didn't know about Grandma's account," he said. "Not until right now." I believed him. That was the hardest part. "I know," I said. He nodded once and walked out. Piper escorted them through the reception area and out through the main doors. I stood in the suite alone for a moment, listening to the ambient music coming through the overhead speakers and the faint sound of voices from the corporate event down the hall. Then I walked back to the front desk, pulled up the evening's operations dashboard, and checked the status of the 7 o'clock service rotation. Everything was running on schedule. Piper reappeared at my side. She looked at me carefully. "You okay?" she asked. "Completely," I said, and I was surprised to realize I meant it. "Want me to log that consultation as a no conversion?" she asked, nodding toward the suite. I actually smiled at that. "Yeah," I said, "log it as a no." I retied the sash on my blazer, picked up the tablet with the evening service queue, and walked back onto the floor. 6 weeks later, on a quiet Wednesday morning, I was sitting at my desk with a black coffee and my inbox open when I got an email from the property management company I'd contracted to handle the commercial leasing for the River North block. The subject line was routine, Unit 4B, new tenant inquiry. The previous tenant in 4B had been a luxury men's grooming studio that had gone under during a slow season. The space had been vacant for 4 months. It had good bones, exposed brick, high ceilings, a street-level entrance with a lot of natural light. I read through the inquiry. The applicant was a licensed massage therapist and certified doula named Kezia, who was looking to open a small prenatal wellness practice. She had excellent references, a solid business plan, and had already secured a small business grant through a women's entrepreneurship program at a local community college. What she didn't have was the first and last month deposit that most commercial landlords in the neighborhood required up front. I read her letter twice. Then I called my property manager and told him to waive the deposit requirement, lock in a 3-year lease at a rate 20% below market, and send her the agreement that afternoon. He paused on the phone. "You sure? That unit could pull full market rate in 2 weeks? I've got 3 other inquiries lined up." "I'm sure," I said. "Send her the agreement." I set down my phone and looked out the window at the street below, the same street I had walked every single morning for 6 years, first as a renter, then as a business owner, and now as something I still didn't have a clean word for. The morning foot traffic was beginning to build, people in coats carrying coffee, a delivery truck idling at the corner. My family had walked through those doors expecting to find a woman who could be pressured and leveraged and pulled back into a role she'd outgrown a decade ago. They had brought a contract and a threat and a baby as emotional collateral, and they had left with a business card for a nonprofit and a very clear understanding of who actually held the lease on every room they'd been standing in. I didn't feel triumphant about it. That surprised me the first time I really sat with it. I had imagined, somewhere in the back of my mind, that a moment like that would feel like winning, like the kind of clean, sharp satisfaction you see in movies where the music swells and the camera pulls back. It didn't feel like that. It felt like setting down something very heavy that I had been carrying for so long I had stopped noticing the weight. There is a particular kind of damage that comes from being the capable one in a family that uses capability as a reason not to care for you. When you are young and you figure things out and you adapt and you survive, the adults around you are supposed to be proud and also still responsible for you. My parents chose proud and then gradually dropped the responsible part. Over time, I became the proof that their neglect had worked out fine. Look, she turned out great. She didn't need us at all. What they never understood was that I turned out like this in spite of them, not because of anything they gave me. My grandmother understood. She put $100 away every single month because she knew I would need a foundation that no one else was going to build for me. And when they took that money, they took it from the one person in that family who had already correctly assessed what I was worth and tried to protect it. That's the part that took me the longest to grieve. Not the estrangement, not the missed birthdays. The $100 a month, every month, from a woman who worked as a school librarian and clipped grocery coupons and never once made me feel like I was a burden instead of a gift. I built this building for her in a way, not consciously, not at first, but sitting here now, I think that's the truest version of what happened. Kezia opened her prenatal wellness practice in Unit 4B 11 weeks after I sent her the lease agreement. She sent me a handwritten note on the day she unlocked the door for the first time. It said, "I didn't think someone would just say yes. Thank you for being the kind of person who says yes. Thank you for being the kind of person who says yes." I keep it in a top drawer of my desk, under my grandfather's old money clip, next to a photograph of my grandmother standing in front of the public library where she worked for 31 years. I don't need my family to know about any of this. I don't need them to understand what it means, or to feel sorry, or to call. I built something real in a city that doesn't give things away for free. I did it with my hands and my credit score and my alarm going off at 5:15 every morning for nearly a decade. I did it without their help, and without their approval, and without ever once waiting for them to decide I was worth investing in. They came looking for a piece of something I built. They left standing on ground that belongs to me. That's enough. I've thought a lot about what my grandmother understood, that my parents never did. She was a school librarian who drove a used car and bought her groceries on sale. She wasn't wealthy by any measure most people would recognize, but she put $100 away every single month for 18 years because she had looked at me, really looked, and decided I was worth investing in before I had done a single thing to prove it. That's not a small thing. That is, I think, the whole thing. What happened in that consultation suite wasn't really about the building. It wasn't about the contract or Alan Rutherford, or the 40% my father thought he could walk in and claim. It was about a much older question that had been sitting unanswered since I was 23 years old, standing in a parking lot with a cardboard box of my belongings, trying to figure out what came next. The question was simple. Do the people who are supposed to love you actually see you? And if they don't, if they only see what you can provide, what you can absorb, what you can be made to give up, what do you do with that? I spent a long time thinking the answer was to earn my way into their line of sight, work harder, build more, become undeniable. And I did all of that, but the night my father sat across from me with a legal document and a threat, and still couldn't say my name without it sounding like a negotiating tactic, I understood something that I don't think I'd fully let myself understand before. Some people are not going to see you, not because you haven't given them enough to look at, but because seeing you clearly would require them to reckon with what they did, and they are not willing to do that. That understanding took 11 years, a forensic accountant, and a real estate filing to arrive at. But it arrived. What I keep returning to is this. Integrity is not something you perform for an audience. I didn't build Soleil to have something to hold over my family's heads. I didn't buy the building so I could produce the deed at a dramatic moment. I did those things because they were the right next step, and the step after that, and the one after that. I made decisions I could live with, even when no one was watching and no one was going to applaud. That consistency, doing the right thing in the right direction even when it costs you something, that's what compounds over time, not just financially, in every way that matters. And the intelligence required wasn't the kind that shows up on a test. It was the kind that reads a situation clearly, that understands when a threat is hollow, that knows the difference between a person asking for help and a person trying to use you. My father walked in believing I was still the 23-year-old who didn't know how the world worked. The gap between who he expected to find and who was actually sitting across from him. That gap was built one early morning at a time. One invoice, one lease agreement, one decision to keep going when it would have been easier to stop. Kyle looked at me before he walked out, and I think he was genuinely surprised to learn about Grandma Vera's account. That matters to me more than I expected it to. He's not my father. He has his own reckoning to do, his own road to figure out. I left a card on the table because that's what I could honestly offer. Not rescue, not a check, not a seat at a table I built without him. Just a real resource from someone who knows what it's like to need one and not have it. I am not interested in being owed an apology. I am not waiting for my father to understand what he cost me, or for my mother to find a version of love that doesn't require me to make myself smaller. I set that down, not because I've forgiven everything, but because carrying it was taking up space I need for what comes next. My grandmother knew I was worth $100 a month before I knew it myself. I spent 11 years learning she was right. That's enough of a foundation to build anything on.